Hello everybody, Adventures Anthony here, and welcome to Adventures Anthony Short Story Edition, Part 2. Okay, so this next story that I'm going to be reading to you guys is made by a good friend of mine. His name is Bennett. He's a part of an old CC class that I went to, and I thought, hey, why not? He might enjoy having his short story portrayed by me. Of course, I am giving him credit. He did very well, and I just can't stress how good he did on this. And I'll just let you guys experience it for yourself. So, everybody, without further ado, Smoke by Bennett Billings. Great, muttered Reed as he looked out his bedroom window. Another rainy day. He could hear his mom downstairs making breakfast, and from the smell of it, she was making French toast, his favorite. When he walked into the kitchen, he saw the balloons and suddenly remembered that today was his 14th birthday. He had forgotten with all the schoolwork that he had been doing lately, as well as studying for his big science exam that was coming up. "Happy birthday, Reed!" his mother exclaimed. "How does it feel to be 14? Reed replied, "Like I'm hungry." His mom smiled and said, "Well, that's nothing new." She put a plate of French toast down at the counter. "Thanks, Mom." "Very welcome." Just as Reed sat down on the counter, the phone rang. "I got it," his mom said. When she picked it up, Reed could hear the voice of the person who always called whenever the hospital needed her. "Okay, I'll be right there." She hung up the phone and turned to Reed. "I'm so sorry, Reed, but they need me at the hospital. Apparently the nurse who was supposed to be on duty didn't show up today. And they need me in the operating room as soon as possible. One of the patients that is in a coma is having seizures. I'll be back soon," she said as she put on her coat. "Love you, Mom." "Love you too. Be right back," she said as she walked out the door. A few minutes later, as Reed was watching TV, he thought that he heard a loud thumping coming from the basement. He turned the TV off and slowly got up. As he walked to the door that led down into the basement, the thumping got louder. But when he opened the door, the thumping stopped. He flipped the lights on and walked down the stairs. When he reached the bottom, he picked up the bat leaning against one of the boxes. As he looked around, he saw a bird lying on the ground next to a small door that led outside. When he stepped closer, he realized that its beak was bloody and that there were marks all over the door. "How did that bird get here?" wondered Reed. He noticed a black box in the corner of the room that he did not recall being there a few days ago. He slowly walked towards it and started to flip it open, but hesitated. He'd seen movies in which the character stupidly opened something that released some form of evil into the world. But this isn't a movie. Stuff like that doesn't happen in real life. Come on, Reed, grow up. You're 14, stop being such a wimp. So, he started to open the lid again, but before he had opened the lid 3 inches, the box burst open by itself. The lights exploded, and it went dark. But not before Reed saw something moving in the shadows. Reed let out a terrified scream and swung the bat at the last place he had seen the movement. Ah! The bat connected with something and melted into nothing. "What are you?" he asked. To his surprise, he heard a voice in his head. "Your worst nightmares." Suddenly 2 fiery eyes appeared next to him. He heard a scream that nearly split his skull. An unseen hand picked him up by his neck and threw him against the door that the bird was lying next to. Upon impact, the door shattered, and Reed flew outside and slammed into the brick wall surrounding his house. Reed groaned and crawled over to the opposite side of the wall and looked over at his house. All of a sudden, his whole house imploded into nothing but a small ball the size of a baseball. It hung in the air for a second and then fell towards the ground. A few seconds before it hit the ground, a cloud of black smoke grabbed it out of the air. The smoke slowly transformed into a black, cloaked figure. The hooded creature looked slowly up at Reed until it was staring straight at him. Only Reed couldn't see anything in the hood except black smoke and two burning circles of fire. It was holding the remains of Reed's house in its hand. A loud, high-pitched voice screamed a foreign language in Reed's head until he was lying on the ground, crying. The black figure slowly raised the hand that was holding the ball and threw it on the ground. When it touched the ground, the ball exploded into fire and hurled 100 million pieces of what used to be Reed's house at Reed. Reed ducked his head just in time to avoid being covered in shards. The houses across from where his house used to be were covered in thousands of holes and causes the houses to collapse. Reed picked himself up and ran as fast as he could towards the woods where he knew he could hide in the cave that he had discovered a few months ago. He looked back at the creature and realized that it was walking towards him. Again, Reed heard a scream inside his head so loud and painful that he started to cry. The creature disappeared and Reed looked back to where he was running. He turned around the corner that he knew would lead straight towards the woods, but stopped so abruptly that he slipped and slammed his head on the road. He slowly got up and looked at the hooded figure that was standing no less than 20 feet from him. Reed could feel blood running down his face. As the creature started to glide towards him, Reed looked around and saw an alleyway. He ran into it and saw that there was a chain-link fence blocking the way to the street. Reed climbed over and landed on the other side. The creature was still on the other side of the fence. Reed ran towards the street. Halfway there, he saw the figure appear at the end of the alleyway, 10 feet away from him. It suddenly streaked towards him and was standing right in front of him. The creature put its hands on Reed's head, and Reed felt paralyzed. The creature looked straight into his eyes and moved one of its hands over onto Reed's forehead. Black smoke slowly started to gather on its arm and glided towards Reed's head and gathered right in front of his head. As the smoke dispersed into several different strands, it started to move around Reed. Instead of the smoke dispersing when the strands connected with his forehead, they went straight into Reed's head. Pain. Pure pain is what Reed felt. Suddenly he felt himself fading away and his eyes rolled back into his head. Reed gasped and screamed. He saw every one of his worst nightmares in his mind. Slowly the strands came out of Reed's head. To Reed's surprise, there was no pain when they came out. He stared at the smoke strands that the creature was now holding and saw that they contained his worst nightmares. The smoke slowly turned into a cloud, but Reed could still see his nightmares floating in it. The cloud floated into the creature's hood and mixed with the rest of the smoke and made up its head. Slowly, the smoke turned into a ghoulish smile. The creature leaned its head back and let forward a huge cloud of black smoke. The cloud slowly transformed into shapes. As Reed looked on, he realized the shapes were creatures from every one of his nightmares. Then as one, the creature slowly stepped towards Reed and smiled. With a scream, Reed jerked awake and was covered in sweat. "Are you okay, Reed?" he heard his mom yell from the kitchen. He got up and looked around his room. He couldn't really remember what he had been dreaming about. Yeah, I'm fine. Just had a bad dream," he yelled back. "Okay, come down and have some breakfast. It's your favorite, French toast." "Thanks, Mom. I'll be right down." When he walked into the kitchen, he saw the balloons. "Happy birthday, Reed!" "How does it feel to be 14? asked his mother. "Like I'm hungry," replied Reed. His mom smiled. "Well, that's nothing new." She put a plate of French toast down on the counter. "Thanks, Mom." "Very welcome," she replied. As Reed sat down at the counter, the phone rang.